We've got a German election, we've got a French election. People are worried about the potential unraveling not only of the euro, but of the EU itself. How are you looking at Europe as the political action in terms of new elections moves to Europe this year? How worried are you about that? What should we all be looking for in Europe over the next 6 months, 9 months?
Yeah, so by way of background to the 6-month question, I think the issue in Europe is that in spite of all of these attempts to try to overcome the crisis, to overcome all of these problems, I think, and you just said it, Europe is much more divided now. You have Eastern Europe, you have Western Europe, you have Northern Europe, you have Southern Europe. And the divides and the frictions and the differences of opinion are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger as we go, right? I mean, this is and then on top of all of that comes Brexit, but not just that. I think the most worrying part is that you do have populist parties, as you said. The vote intentions are growing for them for several of these countries. The first test is the French election. So what to expect in the next 6 months? I think there's going to be a big issue with the way in which the UK is going to frame the Brexit talks. It, to a very large extent, I think will depend on what kinds of commitments the Prime Minister can get from the US or from other countries outside of Europe in terms of concluding some trade agreements and all of that. But that's going to be like really hard because, as you know,
and that's got to be triggered by the end of March, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And next 6 months for sure. And the issue here is that the European Union, of course, wants to, doesn't want to make an example of the UK, but doesn't want to let them, get a very sweet deal.
I think some people would like to make an example of the UK.
Yeah, but they can't because otherwise it will, it will open the floodgates. But at the same time, you still have the problem with the Italian banks. You still have the problem with Greece that apparently is getting worse again. You still have extremely high unemployment. For those of you who don't follow Europe very closely, unemployment among young people in some of the Southern European countries is about 45%. Yeah. And it's been that way for the last 10 years. And overall unemployment is, a little bit under 20% now. Some of those economies are growing more than others, but it's still a big problem. Right. The issue is, and some people may be surprised if I say this, is that at some level, the Brexiters were correct in one thing, which is that there is this dogma in Brussels that more integration in Europe is the solution to every problem. And I, personally believe, as a result of my research, that that's not the case. That's a problem. That the European Union didn't figure out exactly when to stop and where to let enough national decision making. And the euro situation with a single currency makes it really hard because, of course, it's not sustainable in the long run unless you have certain other things in place which require more integration. Banking union, fiscal union, a number of other things. So they're caught in between, this thing of, a little bit more than half of the members are part of the Eurozone, single currency. The others are not. The needs for integration are different depending on whether you are in one club or in both clubs. And just overall, the populist politicians in many of these countries, including the Netherlands, right? That's why the example is very good, are exploiting the situation and saying, the source of all of our problems is Brussels.
The other thing that we should all remember about Europe is that, Europe is a much older society than the US, right, demographically speaking. It's got bigger welfare state overhang, and it's not as innovative as the US. So if we've got stagnation problems in the US, those are magnified in Europe, which I think makes all of these political arguments or the power of populism, the short-term power of populism, even more pronounced. And 2017 does look like a very important year.